What if one of God's first action was to organize something that was already a mess? This is Jill from the Northwoods, and I have always been, when I was in my 20s, I liked chaos. I think because it was interesting to see things shake up. And as I've gotten older, I've learned, one, I don't love chaos, but two, that God's original work was to get rid of chaos and put things into order. So here's where the Hebrew phrase that I want to hand you today, because it's known, you'll kind of see the whole thing. It is Tohu wa bohu, which is formless and void. It's the very first description of earth in Genesis 1:2. And before a single day of creation happens on earth, before the light, before anything is named or separated or put in its place, Tohu means formless, confused, wasteland, and bohu means empty. And these two words show up. It's the only time that they show up together, but they're describing it from two angles. Is that the thing of chaos, raw, unformed, directionless. And, I in my Hebrew class, it was described as the chaos before the beginning. And what God does with it is he doesn't just wave it away. He organizes it day by day, verse by verse. If you haven't seen the structure of it, it's really interesting because essentially he will, form the land and then give it beasts of the land. And then he'll form the sea and give it sea beasts. And, this is basically putting everything into this order that's there. And that's the whole point of it. It's not just an accident of ancient language. It is specifically said in a way, in a pattern. The first 3 days are what scholars call the forming days. God separates light from darkness, separates the water from the waters above and the waters below, separates the dry sea from the land, builds categories, draws boundaries, making distinctions where a moment ago there was no distinction. The next 3 days are filling days. He fills the light and the dark with the sun, the moon, and the stars. He fills the sky and sea with birds and fish. He fills the land with animals and us eventually. He forms and fills the structure first, and then the substance is poured into it. And it's not chaos on its own. The author of life is working on creating an organization. So already you see from the very first pages of the Bible, something being described as formless and emptiness, and God's response to it isn't a single dramatic act of creation out of nowhere. It's day by day organizing, separating, structuring, and then adding to it. And so here's the story of what happens when the pattern gets reversed. And I think it's one of the more uncomfortable ones in the Old Testament for exactly the reasons we think. So while Moses is up on Mount Sinai, receiving instruction from God, and I mean detailed instructions, exact measurements of the tabernacle, precise specifications for furniture and fabric and priestly garments, the most organized building project in the entire Bible, the people are down below on the mountain doing the opposite. They melt down their gold and they build a calf. And Exodus describes the scene afterwards as in telling that the people were unrestrained, running wild, out of control, and the structure at the top of the mountain, and then it's tohu wa bohu at the bottom of it. The same moment, the same nation, two completely different actions going on. And Scripture doesn't treat chaos at the bottom as harmless fun. It's dangerous. It's real danger with real consequences. That shows up later in a much quieter way when Israel finally does camp in the wilderness, and God doesn't leave the arrangement up by chance. Numbers chapter 2 lays out in detail the tribes, who camps where, around the tabernacle, the tribes to the east and the tribes to the south. An order is formed where they march. And when it's time to move, it reads like a seating chart, exactly in order and organized. God cares enough about how a couple of million people wandering through the desert are structured and organized in their camps enough to specifically detail it out. Structure just wasn't an afterthought in their lives to him. It was part of it. And so there's order at the mountain, chaos at the foot of the mountain, and consequences follow. Order again in the patterns of the camp, and specified tribes at the base around the tabernacle. So we see patterns. But this isn't just an Old Testament thing that fades away. Paul says it plainly, as can be said, when he's writing to the church at Corinth. The church is genuinely fallen into worship chaos. People talking over each other, competing for attention, no order at all. And Paul writes and says, God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, and gives instructions that everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. That's about as direct a statement as you can see about God's character that you'll find in the New Testament scriptures around this question. Not that God prefers order, if you're into that kind of thing, but God is a God who wants order. He is not a God of disorder. And it states as a part of who he is, not just a particular style preference of how the church should be run. And so we'll turn now to where I want to land with all of this, because I don't want it to turn into anxious perfectionism, which I don't think is the point at all. You should be orderly, and if you should feel bad if you're not. That's not what we're talking about. This isn't keep a spotless calendar or you're somehow failing God. Structure in Scripture isn't a performance standard. It's closer to a description of how life actually flourishes, the same way a garden flourishes with rows and trellises, rather than just letting everything grow wherever it wants. God's structure in the world of Genesis 1 wasn't him being fussy. It was about him making a place where life could actually take root and be sustained. The tabernacle's precise measurements weren't red tape. It was made as to create a genuinely functional place of worship. The camp's careful arrangements wasn't bureaucracy for its own sake. It was keeping a couple million people from becoming exactly this kind of chaos before the beginning that showed up at the foot of the mountain. And so here's the gospel underneath all of it, is because I don't want to leave it sounding like pure law. None of us keep order perfectly. We all have our versions of chaos at various moments, seasons where structure slips away, where something becomes unrestrained and just takes over our lives. But the good news is that God doesn't demand flawless order from you or from me and then walks away from us when we fail. The good news is that the same God who spoke order into this world at the very beginning of time and is still at the business of doing the same exact thing in you, bringing form to whatever is formless, filling the empty, and not because you organized yourself well enough to earn it, but because ordering chaos is simply what God does. So here's a few steps if you're interested. Is 1, name the place in your life that currently looks a bit like the chaos at the beginning of time instead of a structured camp. Not to shame yourself over it, but just so that you can see it clearly. And the second thing is to remember that structure isn't the opposite of freedom in the scripture. It usually is what makes freedom sustainable. I think that's where I got it wrong. I thought, wow, chaos is about being free and being my own, individual soul. And it's not true. The tabernacle's order made worship possible. Your own structure might be something making it possible to you too. And so the third thing is kind of hold those two truths together instead of picking them apart. God can genuinely call you towards order, but God genuinely meets you in the chaos when you haven't quite gotten there yet. Both can be true. And so if you want to sit with one more text, Genesis 1 and 1 Corinthians 14 are the two texts that we read side by side, showing God ordering the very chaos. The other one is stating outright, he is who he is because of it. So I invite you to take a look at chaos in your own life and see if it's causing disorganization, a lack of action, maybe anxiety in you, and seeing if you can make it a little bit better. Everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate it. I'm Jill from the Northwoods, and you can find everything I do at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. I have a brand new email, northwoodsjill@fastmail.com. I changed my email because my email wasn't reliable, and I want to hear from you. And so I appreciate you contact me if you wish. You can find everything I do at jillfromthenorthwoods.com, which also has my email and ways to contact me at the very bottom. Thank you so much.